That passage of Scripture from the Acts of the Apostles is an often quoted section of Scripture when people think that we need to simplify from how complicated and complex and codified and rules-based and external Christianity and religion has become. When you look at what emerged after Easter, that's our theme for today, what emerged after Easter, it's amazing how simple and beautiful it was, but how spontaneous it was. It wasn't like the disciples had a meeting and said, we need to come up with a new 10 commandments. No, they just lived into the gospel. They lived into the life of Christ, and this is what emerged. For the next 3 weeks, I want to have a conversation about emergent spirituality. That's my hope. And I want to introduce you to some ideas today. One of the reasons that I asked you when you were in your conversation groups about what's the most surprising development of your life is because emergent spirituality is not a top-down, pre-orchestrated, pre-scripted way of approaching life and faith. It is a way of living into the narrative, the story of Christ in us, the life of faith. And then what emerges is actually a surprising manifestation or expression, but it comes about by the way, and this is the thing I hope that you'll understand this morning. This is emergence thought. The way that the smaller component parts, the smaller ingredients of our life, the way that they interact, that determines what ultimately we become. And so this is a conversation I want to have with you over the next 3 weeks because I really view us as an experiment in sort of emergent Christianity or emergent faith or emergent religion, if you will, however you want to talk about that. What got me thinking about this is a couple of months ago, there was a book called Emergent Strategy. And in the circles that I run in, it became a book that, you ever have one of those books that like everyone has read? And they're like talk to you about, and you almost feel like you don't need to read the book because you already know so much about it. The Enneagram is like this for me. In the circles I run in, everyone's talking about this personality profile. It's sort of ancient, but it's making a comeback. Are you familiar with the Enneagram? In United Methodist clergy circles and in academic circles, the Enneagram is so popular, I've never actually studied it, and I feel like I got it. You know? The other advantage is, if this means anything to you, otherwise it's going to sound like I'm speaking in code, I'm a 7. And the great thing about being a 7 is, I'm not that concerned with the other numbers. I can't tell you the difference between a 4 and a 1. All I know is, I'm number 7. It's a nice thing about being a 7. But this emergent strategy, if we go back a slide, the emergent strategy is actually one of those books for me. So many people are engaging this book, and there's so much buzz around it that I got it, and I started to read it, and then I started reading different reviews of it. And some things popped up that I hope you will see with me sound eerily similar to what we're up to here. So the author is Adrienne Marie Brown, and she is an activist and is dealing with much bigger things in our culture that she's trying to bring about changes in the way we organize and strategize to bring about cultural change. So she's dealing with things on a much bigger level than we are at our little congregation. But I want to show you some of the ideas that come out of it, and I hope that you'll see that they are eerily relevant to what we're up to here. So in one of the reviews that I read, the person boiled it down to sort of 3 main themes. And tomorrow, I'll actually post this on our website if you want to follow up and read these reviews for yourself. But here are the 3 things that this one reviewer boiled down as the major themes. Number 1, collaboration is the cornerstone. Number 2, embracing change is a non-negotiable. And number 3 is we must let go of the status quo. Does that sound like a 3-point sermon or what? It's definitely something I've preached. So let's talk this through a little bit. I truly believe that the way you and I interact the way we collaborate together is what we ultimately become. It's not what I come up with in my own workshop. It's not what the denomination hands down in the book of discipline. It's not even what comes up in the bylaws that we've inherited from the last 50 years. That's ultimately, we're not our bylaws, we're not our pastor, and we're not our denomination or our conference. What we ultimately become is how we interact when we are together. That's a different way of thinking. That we're not only limited to how we interpret Scripture or how we've inherited the bylaws or how we're organized as a denomination or who our pastor is. You are the church. You're the church. And how you and I interact with each other is what ultimately the church becomes. The small things give rise to the larger expression. I believe this with all my heart. And I'll be honest, if I didn't believe this, I would be at a much bigger church with a much taller stage and a much louder microphone and a much rockier band if I thought that's what mattered. But I don't think that's what matters. I have no interest in the spectacle, and I have no interest in the show. If I wanted the spotlight, I would pursue it. You know what I'm more curious about? How you and I live out faith together. We make the road by walking. That's what I talked about last week. It is the fascination of my life that when we practice listening to each other, when we are in conversation and dialogue, that is practice for how we interact in the world with our neighbors and our coworkers and our family and at the coffee shop. And that's what Southwest Portland becomes. What emerges comes from how the smaller component parts interact with each other. I believe this with my whole heart. I will give my whole life to this idea because I truly believe it. So the second thing is embracing change as a non-negotiable. Now, many of you know I'm not a big fan of change. Thank you for laughing. Some of you are not laughing, and that's okay. God bless you. Peace be with you. Change is the only constant these days. We live in a time not of incremental change, but of exponential change. Change is the only given. And so I have decided to change from being a farmer that is primarily concerned about the land, and I have decided to trade in building a bigger barn for tearing down and using the timbers to build a ship because the water is rising and I'm going to become a sailor. That's my analogy. We are moving from a land-based brick and mortar society to a very fluid, very liquid culture where definitions change, relationships change, people move geographically all the time. Things are constantly shifting and changing. Relationships are coming and going, high tide and low tide. We live in a time of constant change. And I'm tired of fighting it, so I've decided to embrace it. Change is a non-negotiable. And the third thing is we must let go of the status quo. Now, I say this as one who benefits greatly from the status quo. I am a large, not as large as I used to be, but still large, straight, white, cisgendered, educated male. I benefit from every level of privilege. So it takes a lot for me to say this. We must challenge the status quo because of the injustices built into the system that marginalize and destroy people on the fringes. That is the gospel. It is the good news of Jesus Christ to interrogate and undermine and subvert the unjust nature of the status quo. It must come down. Patriarchy and sexism and racism and homophobia must be challenged every place they emerge because they are not a glitch within the system. They are actually part of the DNA of the system. I'm preaching this morning. So I want to show you this second thing I found. Another reviewer of this book, Emergent Strategy, found 9 sort of points to pass on, and I think that they're good for us just to see this morning. So I've put them up here, and I'll read them to you. Small is good, small is all, because the large is a reflection of the small. You know, you and I live in a really weird time where most people go to churches under 200 and over 1,200. There's something about giving rates and how generations have changed. They call it the economy of scale. We're operating a church between 200 in weekly attendance and 1,200 is nearly impossible. Because in that window, people have very high expectations that you'll have a children's ministry and a music ministry and a singles ministry and a married ministry and a men's ministry, right? And then you have to staff that, but people aren't giving the way that they used to, so it makes it very difficult to pay your staff. So then you're working on volunteer and part-time staff. So I've decided to say, hey, hold on. Small is good. Because at a small church, the expectations are different, and people know that it's about how we volunteer and how we serve and how we collaborate and work together, and that's what we have to offer. It's not a professional or a staffed situation. So small is good. In fact, small is all we have. Ultimately, what we give rise to, the church, is just a collection of the smalls. So let's love the small. Let's not beat ourselves up and you know, navel gaze and hand wring and finger point. It's fine. We will do this thing. People who want to participate in it will come. We will grow as we follow God's Spirit. We'll be fine. We love it. It's good. Small is good. In fact, small is all. Second point, change is constant, so be like water. Water's very powerful in times of change. A little bit of water is cute. A lot of water is terrifying. Be like water. 3, there's always enough time for the right work. There is a conversation in the room that only these people can have at this moment. Find it. There's always enough time for the right work. I love that. We've talked before, you can't save time and you can't spend time. It's not money. Time is only what it is. Choose the conversation you want to be in. Figure out where the change is happening and join in that. 4, never a failure, always a lesson. You know, if we're going to be a risk-taking church, which we have to be because we're in revitalization, we're going to have to take risks. And look, sometimes I feel like a wizard, but I'm not a magician. Sometimes the things we try are going to work, and sometimes they're not. It's just the nature. It's why we're a people of grace. We give each other grace because some things are going to work and some things aren't. All right, let's bring this home. Number 5, trust in people. I'm going to say something that I say a lot and no one ever likes when I say it, which is that most churches, the pastor doesn't trust the people. You cannot believe how much pushback I get when I try and help church leaders, like just breaking you up into those little groups I break you up into. People say, you can't let people talk. Do you know what they'll talk about? They'll get off topic and they'll bring in politics and they'll, you can't trust people? Almost everyone across the board. But look, come on, let's be honest. If you can't trust the people of God, what are we doing here? Because ultimately, whatever the people of God become is what we become. But the honest truth is, there's not a lot of trust. And I hear it all the time. So number 6 is move at the speed of trust. And that's an important one, because you can't move faster than people trust you. Right? So even the changes we've made around here, I had to earn some trust with little things first before we took on the big things. And with you, we started with little conversations, and now we're having much bigger conversations. Not as big as the ones we're going to have in the next 10 years, but big conversations, because you can only move at the speed of trust. Number 7, focus on critical connections more than critical mass. Build the resilience by building the relationship. How we connect is more important at some level than how many people are here. It's a good thing to embrace. 8, less prep, more presence. This isn't a performance, as you're well aware. This isn't a stage show. It's not a spectacle. It is us together with intentionality and grace. Presence. Be present. It's not a performance. And last, number 9, what you pay attention to grows. So we need to prayerfully think and talk together. What do we want to grow? And how can we pay more attention to that? So whether that's our feeding program in our backpack ministry, whether that's a justice issue like immigration for our migrant workers, whether that's homelessness and whether we house families in what used to be our youth room, whether that is LGBT inclusion in the church and advocating for that at our denominational level, if that's children's ministry or air conditioning for this summer, it could be anything. But whatever we want to grow, how do we pay attention to that and be present to it? So I just wanted to introduce these ideas to you today. I'll put this up on the website. I would love to hear lots of feedback on this in the coming weeks. Next week is Mother's Day, and I want to talk about emergent motherhood. Now, it's not what you think of only motherhood. It's the way that in our society that the social feminine gives rise to what we become as a society. The emergent motherhood. It's a big idea that I'm working on, but I truly believe that if you chart just the spider web of how we're all connected through the feminine love in our lives, you will see what we are going to become as a culture. So I hope that you will come back for that conversation.